All right. So
So what
yeah.
were your theories as far as you guys were concerned?
What I would think is in terms of potency, this is just me. In terms of potency, I think the barang would definitely overpower the kulam at this point, but I don't agree with I agree with the fact that the kulam would hit first. I think the barang would definitely kill the person faster because of sheer pain. Although I did think about who Trece would come after first, and
Okay,
I think she would go after the barang too. However, the kambal would have a different story, uh,
because
because the kambalas are annoying twins. They would notice there's something wrong with that guy, and he's not just like, and they would split up and they would look for another thing, and I don't know, just
okay, nice, nice, nice. Okay,
I don't know, and these are just some of the things that we like to talk about, like for example, in a drunken stupor. Let's say we would talk, and they're drunk. I'm high on coffee, and I would throw a question like, "Okay, you have the Infinity Gauntlet with all the gems,
yes,
right? And then on the other side of the multiverse, you have the 7 Dragon Balls.
no, okay,
Two guys
yeah,
who wish for the exact same thing. Let's say I control all the universes combined using
yeah.
the gauntlet and the balls. Which would win?
I would go with the. Well, I'm a Marvel guy. I would go with the Gauntlet. I'm sure the guys go for the 7 Dragon Balls.
That's the thing. We're both Marvel and Dragon Ball fans, and we never end the discussion. It's like, no, man. Like, what if it's the Super Dragon Ball? It's like, yeah, but what if Galactus uses it? Like.
That's yep. That's a good debate. That's a good debate.
And it would just and then you throw in, yeah, but what if they'll go throw in all the Green Lanterns rings and all the lantern rings all together, like, and it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Yes,
So
yes,
talking
yes.
about all these stories, all these crazy ideas all pop up. For us, it's out of boredom. It's out of, I don't know, of liquid substances that are not very illegal, at least until after the prohibition.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but I want to ask you, and if we finally get to the point where I ask you, how did you get to write something as good as Trece? And no, because really, just to give you an idea, I mean, my sister is the first one to bring it about, and I think I told you that my sister was a former student of yours. I think she was
Yes, yes.
you were the advisor for her creative writing or something,
Yes.
and then she brought all the books home, and we started to fight over the books, I was pulling rank, like, you let me borrow it because I'm older than you. you know? You know?
Yes.
And she had no choice but to lend me the books, and I read through all of it. As a matter of fact, in our first episode of the podcast, we talked about one particular story that I loved the most. It's about the white lady in the balete tree that died, and then
Yes, yes, yes.
and I love the twist of that story. And to me, for us guys who would talk about it, would only come after alcohol, caffeine, cola induced drunken stupors. But tell me, how did you come up with this? I know this was in publication in 2005, and knowing the
Yeah.
gravity of this would take years or even at least months to come up with the first story. So why don't you give us the opportunity to please, how did you come up with Trece?
Wow. Okay, okay. I always have a hard time answering this question in a short format
I know.
because I end up having to like really backtrack. But I guess it in a weird way, I guess Trece, you can say the first issue of Trece, which was about the White Lady of Balete Drive, was written in the span of um, it was written in the span of 2 weeks, but at the same time, you could say um, it took me 5 years to figure it out, and it was thanks to 30 years of growing up in Manila to that eventually came into play. So to talk more about that, again, the why did Trece come about? It was because Kadjo in 2005 sent me a text message in the middle of a very, very busy year. It was around June or May. And he sent me a text message saying, Budge, gawa tayo ng comics. Gawa tayo ng monthly comics. To which I said, that's impossible. You work in Macan, I work in Harrison. We both OT almost every night. We cannot possibly do a monthly comic. And then he said, basta, padalan mo ako ng 20-page script. Matatapos ko siya in 20 days. Sabi ko, sige. And that's what made me dig up an old script. And that old script started 5 years back, around 3-4 years back. And it was already the plot of what if somebody found the white lady dead on the streets of Balete. And I didn't know, why or how. I just liked the idea. What if somebody murdered a ghost? That was the whole concept. The name Trese needs to go back further, a couple of years back. And that was the name my friend Mark Gatella came up with, because we used to work for a radio show.
Mm-hmm.
And for that radio show, the assignment was talk about supernatural and paranormal topics. That was the only brief given to us. And it was Mark who came up with, so why don't we come up with ghost stories, but set all of the stories in the city? And then he said, we need a narrator. We need a host of a show. So, if Tales from the Crypt had the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah.
And, if Twilight Zone, if Twilight Zone had, that ever-present, omniscient voice of Rod Serling, we needed somebody like that. So Mark came up with the thought of a guy named Anton Trese. And then he would narrate, what's the story all about.
Okay. This is nice.
So funnily enough, Mark wrote the first episode of the Anton Trese show, and I was the voice. And then since we needed to deliver on a weekly basis, me and Mark started to take turns writing those stories. So again, it was us trying to channeling, Stephen King, X-Files, Twilight Zone, and all of those things, but putting it into a Pinoy context. And then you have to backtrack a couple of more years. And again, growing up in Manila, I was born in 1972, meaning I grew up hearing about the White Lady of Balete Drive. I grew up hearing about that there was I grew up hearing there was a snake under, a
Galleria.
I read, in Galleria. I grew up where the tabloids, I would hang out and look through. Yes, we had no internet back then, so I had no choice but to look at newspapers. And the tabloids would talk about that there was a Mananggal sighted in Manila.
Right. The one that got caught in the electrical wires and stuff.
Yes. Right. So you grow up in an environment that tells you that you do live in a magical, mystical city, and that all just gets funneled into one storyline. Right?
I know, and that's what's so cool about it. And I remember another story about when she was trying to heal. I don't know. I think it was it the renegade Capre.
Yes.
And she
the
used
renegade Tikbalang.
I think Hagibis was his name, and she used the mercury drug.
Malikisi, yes.
Malikisi. And she uses the mercury drug to, this is so cool. And I was just like, I cannot believe this. And that's so wonderful. And you also got the Black Darna in. And for us, for us who were reading about these things, we actually talked about you in our first episode. So you have no idea how much we're fangirling about this. And then, so now we understand where Anton Trese came from.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, and just goes to show that I really can't find a way to talk about this in a really short way. But there, and yes, and just to go back to how you guys work, that first issue of Trese came about because I was hanging out with my friends. I was hanging out with Mark Gatella, my brother Brandy, who drew my first comic book, horror comic book Payaso. I was hanging out with Bo Guerrero and JB Tapia, who are my collaborators in the Demon Dungeon comic book. So that was our. If you have the Banahaw Boys, we have this group. You know, and we called ourselves Brigade. And that's another long story. And just to qualify, we came up with that name before Rob Liefeld released his comic book.
The Rob Liefeld Brigade comic. Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, and yes, just like you, we loved to hang out at. Back then, there were no Starbucks. Strangely enough, I'm sure people would go. Kids today would go, "What do you mean there was no Starbucks?" There was no Starbucks back then. So the only 24-hour place near our hangout was actually a Mr. Donut. So Mr. Donut in Green Hills was the only 24-hour place. So we were fueled by coffee and donuts when we came up with these crazy ideas. And I think it's hanging out with those guys that really, helped me become a great storyteller. It's they were the ones that came up with and of course I have to say, eventually later on when Alamat got formed, David Hontiveros became part of our barkada. So David Hontiveros, of course, is the author of the sci-fi novel Xerox. If you haven't read that, it's got a great premise, and the whole idea is that in the future in the Philippines, you can now buy a Xerox copy, a clone of anyone from around the world. And because we are living in the Philippines, it's the copy of a copy. So pirated version siya nung tao na yun. So it might not be of great quality, but you could have a bodyguard that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or you could have a sex slave that looks like, choose your favorite star. But unfortunately, it's a copy of a copy. So some defects might come with it. But anyway, so David has that book, Xerox. And we were editing each other's scripts back then. So hanging out with those guys, I think really was just all of every time we just talk about, it could have been easily a topic like what you just said, Mambabarang versus Mangkukulam, and that little storyline would have ended up in the back of my head, and those are the stories I dug up as I started to write Trese.
That's really interesting, and more than that, it's really inspiring because people would always wonder, like, how do you come up with all of these things? It's always a time when people get together, and and it's fueled by none other than just a good night of talking, and what ifs, and it's always a what if, and then a what if it materializes, it becomes great, and then it look where it is now. Now Trese is going to be on Netflix. And I know we saw that, and we were browsing through Netflix one night, and like, we got nothing else to watch, and then Trese pops out. I was like, wait, hold on, like what? Wait, this can't be. And then we went back to it, and there's nothing much written on the thing. It says based on a popular Filipino comic book, manga / is a supernatural detective. Period. What? So I ran to get my phone, and I got my laptop, and I started looking for this, and lo and behold, it is Trese. And that's probably the way forward of it now, like, but wait, hold on, before I touch the way forward part, what were the struggles of Trese? I know that it has evolved, and a lot of stories came up to it, and I like the stories that came in, especially the war god that that birthed the Kambals, and you trapped him in a video game that's run by these two old diwata who happen, masquerading as old people,
yes.
and all of these things. I know it's not an easy thing to do because I love writing. One of the things that I do is I love to write, and I love to talk. I can't draw much. My daughter does, but I can write, and I know that you get a lot of these I don't believe in creative block. I don't believe in it. I believe that I get lazy. I get very lazy. Like, it it feels better lying down a little bit. It feels better. Sometimes I just sit down and take my coffee and I just want to think. I try to think. I try to tell myself that I want to think first, but really I just don't feel like it.